Hello, welcome to another segment of our podcast, Like Father, Like Son. I'm Leonard Sbrocco, and along with Nick Sbrocco, today we're joined with longtime friend from my Army days, retired Colonel Sam Hartwell. Sam's been in Kyiv since the invasion began in the spring of 2022. And today we want to talk about the contentious White House meeting that took place on February 28th, 2025, and the war. But let's start with a quick introduction from Sam. And please tell us what you've been doing in Kyiv the past 3 years.
Right. As you know, I got here 13th of March, 2022, and started assisting NGOs, bringing in medical support largely for the Army at the time. And that's transitioned to medical support for hospitals of various types, civilian and frontline. And also the support of local civilians, which is now becoming an issue. So yeah, I'm still here, in and out, serving veterans now as well, trying to raise money for amputee electric scooters, because for a double amputee, giving him an electric scooter is like giving him a car. Suddenly, the family can take him out. They can travel together for kilometers, which you couldn't do with a simple wheelchair. So we're focused on veteran support right now, and I'm here until it ends.
Well, Nick and I are going to personally express our gratitude to you and make sure we say thank you for your personal investment, your time, and your effort, and even your money that you put into this cause. So let's start off. So, what was your impression of the White House meeting with President Vladimir Zelenskyy and the president and the vice president that took place? When you first heard about it, when you first heard about it and saw it, what were you, I mean, I can only imagine what you're going through your mind, Sam.
Well, as soon as everybody saw it online, just the altercation, you knew that it was a disaster. But then I went back and I looked at the entire 49, or I guess 52 minutes or 57 minutes, whatever it was. But at 49 minutes, up to 49 minutes, it was quite civil and it was informative. And you could see that Zelenskyy was quite distressed. I mean, the body language was distressed. And I didn't understand why until after. And oppositely, Trump was very ebullient. He seemed really happy with the deal that they thought they were going to sign. But then suddenly, at like 49 minutes and 30 seconds, I think it was, when Vance interjected, demanding you're not even thankful, and just started the ad hominem, just, pummeling the guy, and suddenly, and of course, Trump then, because he's a very reactive personality, double teams, and suddenly you have an earthquake of problems. And the poor guy, Zelenskyy, is sitting there with the two most powerful people, supposedly, in the world, and he's being shouted at. I thought he handled it extremely well. His one strategic error that everybody realized afterwards is that he should have had a translator, because he's not a perfect English speaker. He didn't have time to speak or to think before he spoke. He didn't properly understand what these guys were yelling about, I suppose. I can only imagine. But then afterwards, I find out from people who have checked all the sources that as soon as Zelenskyy walked out, the tweets from the Trump team simultaneously were all released, all negative, just as he's walking out of the White House. So clearly it was a setup. They had planned to excoriate him if he didn't agree to everything that they wanted. And they thought that he had agreed. And that's why the distressed look on Zelensky's face, that's what that was all about. He was going to be forced to sign something that had no security guarantees, explicit or implicit, and he was doing his best trying to defend his country. That's the way we see it after the fact. And I say we, I say a lot of people, most people inside Ukraine, and most people that I talk to outside Ukraine. I've seen some CNN polling that over 50% believe that it was Trump's fault, 42 said Vance's fault, 4% Zelenskyy, and 4% didn't know. But it was clearly a disaster. Now, what do you do? Is that your next question? What does Zelenskyy do?
Let's dig into it.
I think it's more Vance's fault, because I think Trump, to me, he wants to be known as the guy that got the peace, the peacemaker. He didn't say anything to Zelenskyy when he was talking. He was quiet. He was sitting there. He might have dropped like a little line at the end, like a little undertone, like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but we can talk about it later. Like, he might have said something to diss him a little bit, but it would have been like a very under the tone, under the breath. And he would have moved on, got his mineral deal that he wanted. That was a bit of a scam anyways, because the security details and that sort of stuff. But he was getting what he wanted. He was going to get peace, what he was doing, and people would be like, look at Trump, he's the savior. And he would have been like, look at me. And then Vance bit the bait, because Zelenskyy was kind of like waving, Russia, they can't be trusted, they can't be trusted. Vance took the bait, and then they started jumping him.
Yeah, Vance picked a fight. It was clear to me at that 49th minute, I think it was, in 30 seconds, that when he jumped in, picks a fight about not saying thank you. Let me tell you, Zelenskyy has the entire time been profusely thankful of the United States, and that was an unfair, extremely unfair accusation.
I also think that thankful thing's funny, because Vance voted no on military aid every single time to Ukraine, so I don't know why he's thankful to Vance. And Trump so far has given them nothing. They canceled US aid. They're threatening to cancel Starlink, all this sort of stuff. So I don't know why he'd have to technically be thankful to these guys right now. But
to the USA.
To the USA, even though he said it multiple times.
Yeah, it was a setup.
Hey, guys, I dug up two quotes from President J.D. Vance. One during his run for senator in the great state of Ohio in 2022, he said, quote, "I don't really care what happens to Ukraine one way or another." Also, just a year ago, he also was quoted as saying, "I don't think Putin is an existential threat to Europe." So
the Europeans do.
Yeah. So that's what our country and the world is dealing with right now. I wanted to ask you about, Sam, are you familiar when the earthquake happened? It was after Vice President Vance was lecturing on it's time for diplomacy, and here's where Zelenskyy didn't listen to the senators he had met with before to just nod and grovel and follow and be nice, play nice, right? He brought up Minsk and how you can't trust Putin. So can you tell us a little bit about this whole Minsk agreement, the one that
Minsk
was
1 and 2. I think it was the second.
Yeah.
The second specifically had no defense. The first might have.
Right. After 2014, it was that one. Are you familiar with that, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I know about Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. I can't recite details anymore. I can just tell you that, between France and Germany trying to deal with Putin, it was just farcical. It's just theater. There were constant breakages of this agreement going on. You had a multi-European force in place as not as a monitoring group, the OSCE. The OSCE is kind of a military force. I had actually applied to be part of that, and I was vetoed, even though I was a long time, our active duty Army, fresh out of the army and very knowledgeable of Soviet stuff. I was told later by some French colonels that were part of the OSCE that I was most likely vetoed by the Russian side because of my credentials. But yeah, there were constant violations. And do remember, that's when they shot down that Malaysian plane flying from the Netherlands over Ukraine. So there were all kinds of these egregious actions going on. That was just a massacre of that plane. But it was constant. You know, Minsk 1, Minsk 2. It was just a farce. It was just a game. While Putin was gearing up, getting his military machine in order, and you saw the final outcome.
I'm curious. What do you think about it being deemed disrespectful? Because people are saying Zelensky was disrespectful to Trump, to Vance. That's a lot of what MAGA and people that agree with Trump and think he did the right thing. They say Zelensky was disrespectful to not just them but to America.
Yeah, again, nonsense. Did he raise his voice? Did he lose his composure? No, quite the opposite. The other two, the president and the vice president of the United States, are the ones that were loud, abusive, cutting off Zelensky in the middle of his conversation or statements. No, I think Zelensky was reserved and showed a lot of class, and oppositely, our president and vice president's performance was atrocious. None of us have ever seen a president behave like that to another foreign leader on camera. It was just hideous, not diplomacy.
And it's surprising. I mean, if you look at not Senator, but the Secretary of State Rubio's his body language during the meeting, but then also a longtime Ukrainian supporter, Senator Lindsey Graham, they both took the administrative line and said Zelensky was out of line. Zelensky was disrespectful, which is, I mean, I understand the Secretary of State, but for the Senator Graham doing it, they're all sticking to this line, Sam. That's all they're doing.
Look, I actually met Lindsey Graham once in Afghanistan. He stayed at our facility there when I was working for DIA, and he's an amiable guy. But look, he's a political chameleon. You know, he's the one who started off saying that Trump is the worst thing that'll ever happen to the Republican Party. He'll destroy it. And he was right. And he's been largely right all along. But in order for him to have any influence over the man or inside those circles, he's got to toe the line. And he's a political chameleon. Only, I'm sure he would like to speak like Senator McConnell, who is now, medically, almost medically incapable anymore, and speak his honest to God truth. But I think that Graham is thinking that he just needs to manage the situation, carry the party line. He knows. Everybody who saw that could see that there was no disrespect on the side of Zelensky. That was a hit job. Go ahead.
I think a lot of people also will say that this is kind of the cementing that this administration is more pro-Russia than pro-Ukraine. They started with only Russia, meeting with Russia and Saudi, I think it was, and many MAGAs, maybe not many, but some will say it was to see if Russia would come to the table, see if they would negotiate, see if they're real, but no Ukraine. So maybe they're right. Maybe they are bringing them to the table. And then Trump says Zelensky's a dictator. Takes it back when he meets with Stromer. It refuses to answer if Putin is a dictator. He and Musk hint at Ukraine starting the war, and Hegseth, even though he reported about it on Fox News when it happened, is refusing to also answer. And then this happens. Do you agree that this administration has since taken a pro-Russian stance?
It sure looks that way. I mean, all of the the data points line up that they are, for some reason, clearly supporting the Russian side, the Putin narratives. I've talked to former old Soviet guys that are emigrated to America in the 70s and 80s, and they said, yeah, he's exactly parroting what Putin wants to hear. Question: why? To bring him to the table? Okay, but the way that you're messaging to your friends isn't very. It doesn't bring confidence to our side of the table. You leave the Europeans out, you leave the Ukrainians out. Okay. Understand that the Russians feel that Europe is just a bunch of little countries, and that they only want to talk to the big guy on the block, us. I mean, there's an advantage to that, but if you've got to say that we are doing this in close coordination with our allies, our NATO allies, and our friend Ukraine. But they didn't paint it that way. They didn't present it that way. It looks like they're just towing the Russian line. So I can't figure it out yet. I can't make a prediction. Let's see what happens after this next Munich thing.
Since you're in Ukraine, one of the points that I thought Zelenskyy nailed Vance on was Zelenskyy said, have you ever come to Ukraine? Have you seen what happens in Ukraine? And it's a rare. Vance is a great debater. I'll give him that. He's a smart guy. He's a good debater. And he hesitated a moment and was like, "I've seen videos. I've seen what it looks like on. I've heard the stories." And that's just he deflected, having not been there. He should have been like, "I'd love to come there and see in person." But
No,
he had a narrative.
It's a propaganda tour. He said it's a propaganda
He was a propaganda tour. He
Yeah.
was completely against it. So as someone there, what do you think of, if he did come there, his perspective, would it change? Would he believe it's a propaganda tour? What's kind of your sentiment, feelings on that?
Look, the guy was 8 years old when the USSR fell. He's never been here during the time of the USSR or after the fall of it. His knowledge seems to be confined to YouTube videos, many of which have Russian influencers behind them. I cannot believe that a Yale-educated lawyer is so biased towards his own opinions that are unsubstantiated. He's been turned. I don't know why he accepts everything that Putin says and nothing that Zelenskyy says. That's a really bad sign that he doesn't understand the adversary, Russia, and they are an extraordinary adversary. And we have Trump has no leverage or influence over Putin. You recall that he said, he told Putin that, look, don't escalate because that would be a problem for us. Well, in the next 3 days, we got the largest missile and Shahed drone attacks that we've had since the war began. So there was the answer to you, Mr. Trump. I don't know why they bend so much and look the other way. They've been turned. I don't get it.
To shift a little bit to the reactions from it, because I think Europe have started to open their eyes a little bit. They all said, we stand with Ukraine. They're having meetings Saturday, Sunday, and I'm sure continuously. The people are starting to open their eyes, especially, I imagine, people like Taiwan, South Korea, Japan. They start to look at it as, if we're ever in trouble, are these guys going to come help us out? And it gives strength to China, strength to Russia to look at Ukraine, to look at Georgia, China to look at Taiwan. And I think our allies are starting to question what's going on. How much damage and betrayal do you think that meeting has caused the U.S.?
Right. Nick, before I answer that one, I didn't completely answer your previous question. You said, if he came to Ukraine, do I think he would change his mind? Look, he doesn't want to come, because if he was on film at Bucha, looking at the memorial that has the names of over 400 civilians killed in the streets from age 2 to literally 101, that there's no way that he could deny the fact of a Russian invasion and Russian atrocities. So he doesn't want to be confronted with it. He doesn't want to have to lie that obviously in front of the camera. It's easy for him to stand and say away and say, oh no, you're going to show me propaganda, but blah, blah, blah. That shows you the character of the man. He's afraid to be confronted with evidence. And as a lawyer from Yale Law School, come on, that's horrific. The man has no morals at all. Now, how does it affect our allies in Europe? Geez, they're already, I get information from Norwegian friends, Finnish friends, German friends, French friends, UK friends, and they all believe that this is perhaps not a complete decoupling from the United States, but it is now a new arm's length relationship, and they need to come up with a European army. Germany is now, I'm getting it from friends inside Germany, their 50 billion euro defense budget is going to skyrocket to 200 at least, quickly to 400 after that. 200 billion in the next budget, and then up to 400 over the next 5 years. The little countries around the world, in Asia, you know, Taiwan has got to be shaken, because if we're going to hand a strategic win to Russia, it tells you right away that Trump is going to find a way to hand a strategic win to China on Taiwan. The problem with Taiwan, though, for business purposes, and I've spoken with Taiwanese engineers from MIT graduates who tell me that it will take 30 years to fully transplant the semiconductor industry from Taiwan to the USA, because it's not just a simple, we'll move this factory over here, which would be extremely difficult in and of itself, but you've got all these support and ancillary businesses to that semiconductor industry that we just don't have. And they have by far the best technology, semiconductor technology. And that's what the fight is over economically. And, you know, Trump being an economics guy, that's going to be a business guy. That's going to be, I don't know how that develops. But your main point, the little countries around the world, and especially in Africa now too, because he's pulled NIH funding for things like the AIDS program and malaria and polio. Those folks used to vote with us in lockstep in the United Nations. That's gone now. Okay, we pull that funding. We are literally killing 1 million Africans in the next year by pulling that funding. I'm exaggerating, 1 million, but I've been told by folks who know it far better than me that it will affect the lives of millions in Africa. What happens there? Who's got the major presence in China or in Africa now? It's China. Has been building for a long time. When I was in Africa 25 years ago, the best road that I drove on in Kenya was Chinese funded and Chinese built, and it's been going up ever since the influence campaign in Africa. So China's going to replace us in Africa next.
That you perfectly led me into my other question. I just saw, first to add to that, Russia's been growing influence as well in Africa. So, and ours is just going down and down. But to stay on China, Zelensky's top guy, I don't know if I'm going to say his name right, Andrei Yermak.
Yermak
said that it's possibly time to arrange a meeting between Zelensky and China, which is kind of if China comes into Ukraine and gets a deal done, that is the biggest blow to America I think that Trump could possibly ever have, and I think he'd be livid if China came in, negotiated peace while he sat back. So I think, like you were saying, China's moving into Africa. If they do something in Ukraine, whether this is true or not, I think it's starting to set up China to look better and better, because as we were pulling U.S. aid, China was moving into smaller island countries in Oceania and that sort of thing. So the less we're pulling out, China's moving in. What do you think of this kind of happening and implications?
Well, here's a little known fact, okay? Back when Yanukovych was the president, he's the guy that Ukrainians rebelled against. He was pro-Russian and he threw him out. Under Yanukovych, he signed an agreement with China, putting Ukraine under the protection of the Chinese nuclear umbrella. That agreement exists. So, you know, at the beginning of the war, when people were worried about nuclear weapons, which was a whole bunch of nonsense anyway, that point was never brought up. And, you know, China was never going to allow it to happen. I've heard, you know, retired four-star generals like General Petraeus himself, my old commander, much higher than me, but he said as much himself. Look, when you've been abandoned, essentially, and humiliated by the greatest democracy in the world, who had pledged to support you forever, and suddenly they're going to stop all of their military support and threatening Starlink cutoff, what do? You gotta embrace somebody, and it's not just Ukraine, but the Europeans are now talking, look, if you're going to decouple from us essentially economically, if you're going to punish us with tariffs, the natural security and trading partner for the EU becomes China. Why? They don't have any mutual defense security issues, quite the opposite. And China would not allow Russia to screw with the European Union, China's largest market of 450 million consumers. So there you have some natural alliances that are going to be formed because of this hideous America only policy. Let's say it now. It's not America first anymore. It's America only. And let's expose this MAGA phrase for what it is. Make America great again. Who said that first? Ronald W. Reagan on his first stump speech in Flint, Michigan, way back in 70 something. We're going to make America great again. This is all just theater.
Hey, let's switch gears. What's the Ukrainian Actually, I'm going to share with you a few. I dug up a few interviews from Ukrainians after viewing this White House insult and chaos that went on. One said Trump and Vance were schoolyard bullies. Another one said, while Ukraine wants peace, Trump just wants a deal. Think about that. Peace versus a deal. And another one said, we would rather die on our feet than beg on our knees. How do you think the reaction is in Ukraine? Are people supporting their president, or are they, or is panic overtaking the outrage? Where are they with it?
Outrage. You know, panic? No. Anger, outrage. But all three quotes that you got there, they all apply. Yeah, absolutely. We're not going to quit. No. In fact, I'm going to a meeting tomorrow night with a bunch of other NGOs to decide, you know, what you know, exchange, you know, our ideas on plans and way forward. But nobody's going to quit here. I suspect that the EU, Europe, has got to do something. As we've said for a long, long time, that a coalition of the willing, just to bring in humanitarian support only. No offensive military force, just purely a humanitarian operation that all militaries are trained and skilled at doing with the appropriate air cover. It's got to happen. You know, I'm going off topic on some things here. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's all enlightening. It's very enlightening. The other question is, can Ukraine fight on without U.S. aid? That's the whole thing where Trump Trump thinks he has all the cards, as he said. But the truth is, he's underestimating the people who have their backs against the wall and a gun held to their head are going to give up.
Well, look, here's the thing. The Abrams tanks, nobody cares. Nothing. Javelins are no longer relevant on the battlefield. Can you imagine? They are no longer relevant because of these FPV drones that from 15 kilometers out for $500 with a good targeteer behind it can destroy a tank. Usually it takes 3, so 1,500 out of, for a $3 million tank, great. And Ukraine is producing the hell out of these things every month. I've seen the production facilities and my eyes just went, whoa, I couldn't believe it. And I have a very good friend who's responsible for like a 200-kilometer frontline trace down in the south. He'll tell you, look, they may be gaining, a couple of kilometers a month, but they are getting pummeled hard. And they are using horses and donkeys to move things around, beat up old trucks. They are on their butts, the Russian army, even worse than they ever were. It would be so easy to break them, so easy if Trump had the leadership, if he had the vision and the leadership to do it. I know other people who have talked to NATO people and said, look, if it ever had to come to blows, if the Russians ever, if we ever needed to go kinetic for any reason, that it would take literally 8 hours to eliminate the Russian army capability in occupied Ukraine. That's an unofficial view from some very knowledgeable people, let's say. But you guys didn't ask me about what Zelenskyy should do or what are his options. Yeah. And I'm just gonna interject that right now. What can he do? He can either grovel, come back in some, well, I don't want to say grovel, but I want to say he'll need to re-engage Trump and stroke the ego to get the support from the USA. Or if the Europeans are backing him up, the Europeans can say, look, we recommend that you find some way back, but if you don't, we're here and we're gearing up hugely and we're going to support you until we can produce at the level of the United States of what you need, which is going to take another 18 months or so. Or as I've, both sides, Putin, for unknown reason, well, I think I know why, but Putin hates Zelenskyy, and we know why Trump hates Zelenskyy. He could magnanimously say, I need to step down. I've tried my best. It's clear that I can't make progress, but to do what's best for my country, I'm going to resign, and I ask that the parliament appoint, let's say, General Zelenskyy as caretaker, as protector of the nation until an armistice is signed, and then 90 days after the armistice, there will be an election and I will not run. In my mind, that would be the ideal solution, but politically inside Ukraine, I do not understand the forces of, who's on one side. I only know that Zelenskyy is against Poroshenko team, and I know the Poroshenko team. I knew him 35 years ago before he ever was in politics. And then I know that the army and the people trust and love Zelenskyy, but I don't know how, Zelenskyy views him as a political. I think the best thing is that he's to be regarded in history as a Churchill or a Roosevelt figure. That would be my recommendation if I'm his advisor, to do that. Otherwise, you go back to Trump and try to get a best deal. But if you can't, then you got to rely on the Europeans. Those are the three options that I see.
Well, thank you. We're going to end on a note. Again, it was really appreciate for all you're doing there, but for taking the time to enlighten us on the current situation. We're going to revisit it with you, we promise. But on behalf of my son, Nick Spracco, thank you, Colonel Hartwell, and Sam, we appreciate good seeing you. And we'll be
Yeah.
back and talk, and let's hope for the best. That's all we can do.
Absolutely. And I'm signing out from Kiev. Great to see you guys. Thank you.
Good to see you.